the most important stamp on pop music or anything like that. But what I did that was different from other people, I think, was that I sang a very diverse range of music.
It was a moment that caught fans, critics, and music historians off guard. One of those cultural tremors that seems to emerge out of nowhere, shaking up long-standing perceptions and reigniting interest in an artist whose influence has never quite faded. When Linda Ronstadt finally stepped forward and confirmed what many had long whispered about behind closed doors and across hushed online forums, it felt like the closing of a chapter that had remained half-written for decades. The revelation wasn't scandalous in the traditional sense. There were no tabloid theatrics, no salacious exposés. It was far more subtle, far more intimate, and yet it carried the weight of something immense. Something transformative. Linda Ronstadt, in her own time and on her own terms, had chosen to confront a truth that had hovered over her legacy like an invisible thread. The real reason she walked away from music when she did. Before we start, smash the like and subscribe buttons for more updates. For years, there had been speculation. Whispers that Ronstadt had grown disenchanted with the music industry. Rumors that the pressure of maintaining her status as one of the most versatile and celebrated vocalists of the 20th century had finally worn her down. There were, of course, the facts everyone knew, the Parkinson's diagnosis that ultimately silenced her extraordinary voice, the political convictions that made her both revered and controversial, and the deeply personal choices that defined her career in a business that often demanded conformity. But what she finally admitted went beyond illness, beyond exhaustion, and even beyond the shifting cultural tides. It spoke to the emotional and psychological toll of living as an artist in an era that demanded perfection and punished deviation. Linda Ronstadt had quietly carried the burden of never quite fitting into the boxes the industry had built for her. What she revealed, gently, without fanfare, was that the weight of always being defined by others, the constant tug-of-war between her artistry and the expectations placed upon her, had played a far larger role in her decision to retreat from public life than anyone had imagined. This wasn't just about Parkinson's, though that had been the visible endpoint. Long before the diagnosis, she had felt the slow erosion of creative freedom. As someone who had built her reputation by moving seamlessly between genres, rock, pop, country, mariachi, opera, Ronstadt had constantly challenged what a female artist was allowed to be. That boundary-pushing spirit won her critical acclaim and commercial success, but it also made her a target of industry skepticism and misunderstanding. She admitted for the first time that she had grown weary of being treated as a curiosity rather than a musician. Her genre bending had often been met with confusion instead of celebration. Critics struggled to place her, and in a business that thrives on labels, she became something of a paradox. To fans, she was a voice unlike any other, capable of wringing raw emotion from the simplest ballad or powering through complex orchestral pieces with the precision of a trained soprano. But behind the scenes, she had to constantly defend her choices, fight for control, and navigate the exhausting dance of asserting her identity in rooms dominated by men who often saw her more as a vessel than a visionary. There was also the emotional vulnerability she revealed, how fame, once thrilling, had become a source of discomfort. The adulation that once energized her began to feel hollow. Every performance became a negotiation between her true self and the version the audience wanted. She spoke of feeling detached on stage, of going through the motions not out of joy, but obligation. The realization that her relationship with music had shifted so dramatically was, she admitted, quietly devastating. She had once lived and breathed her craft, driven by a passion that felt larger than herself. But over time, that passion had dimmed, not from lack of love, but from the constant friction of trying to exist authentically in a space that often demanded compromise. The implications of her admission rippled outward in ways that extended far beyond her personal story. In many ways, it cast a new light on the broader experiences of women in music, particularly those who refused to be boxed in. Ronstadt's journey echoed the struggles of countless artists who found themselves having to choose between authenticity and acceptance. Her career, now re-examined through this lens, became a testament to the cost of defiance in an industry built on predictability. Her success had always been staggering, but her truth revealed the loneliness that can accompany artistic bravery. She had paid a price for her independence, not in record sales or awards, but in emotional wear and creative fatigue. This revelation also reframed the narrative around her retirement. Until now, most had accepted the official story at face value, that Parkinson's had taken her voice and with it her career. But hearing Ronstadt describe the deeper, less visible fractures that had begun long before the diagnosis offered a more complex human understanding of what it means to walk away. It wasn't just a physical limitation, it was an emotional culmination. Years of resisting being molded, years of navigating the shifting expectations of the public and the industry had slowly worn her down. The silence that followed her exit wasn't just about disease, it was a reclaiming of peace. Fans responded with a mixture of awe and sorrow. There was admiration for her honesty, of course, but also a sense of collective guilt. Had the world expected too much of her? Had her versatility, her relentless pursuit of new sounds, made her into something people admired but never truly understood? The answer, for many, seemed to be yes. For all her accolades and achievements, Ronstadt had long been navigating a lonely road, one where the rewards of artistic success were tempered by the constant push to justify, to explain, to prove. And in that light, her departure became less of an end and more of an act of self-preservation. Her words also ignited a deeper conversation about the nature of legacy. What does it mean to be remembered as one of the greatest voices of all time, if that remembrance is built on misunderstandings or incomplete truths? Ronstadt's admission challenged fans and critics alike to reconsider the narratives they build around artists, how they exalt them, confine them, and ultimately forget that behind every song, every note, is a human being navigating a very real, often painful inner world. It was a call for greater empathy, not just for her, but for every artist who has ever felt trapped by the image projected onto them. There was a kind of poetic symmetry in the timing of her confession. Ronstadt had spent her entire career refusing to be predictable. Even at the height of her fame, she defied expectations, recording albums in Spanish, collaborating with classical musicians, and walking away from the rock scene when it no longer felt right. Her choices often bewildered industry executives, but thrilled those who craved something more than formula. Now, with nothing left to prove and no commercial incentive to speak, she had once again chosen the road less traveled, telling the truth not for attention, but for closure. It was also a striking reminder of how much the industry had changed, and how much it hadn't. Ronstadt's experience, laid bare at last, resonated deeply in a time when conversations about artistic autonomy, gender, and mental health in entertainment are more urgent than ever. Her story, while deeply personal, became part of a broader reckoning with how the music world treats its icons, especially women who dare to color outside the lines. Her legacy, already monumental, now carried an added layer of significance. She had not just sung the soundtrack to countless lives, she had also lived in real time the tension between genius and survival. What made her admission so powerful was not just the content of what she said, but the quiet strength with which she said it. There was no bitterness, no desire to rewrite history or cast blame. There was simply clarity, a woman looking back and naming the forces that had shaped her life, both for better and worse. It was an act of reflection, yes, but also one of profound liberation. In speaking her truth, she reclaimed a part of herself that had long been buried beneath the noise of fame. She reminded the world that behind the artist was a person, and that person had finally found peace in her silence. That silence, it turned out, had never been empty. It had been full of meaning, full of choice. And now, with her words, Ronstadt had invited the world to sit with that silence and truly listen. Not to her voice, lost to illness, but to her story, her journey, her inner world. In doing so, she offered a rare glimpse into the unseen battles that so often accompany success. It was a gift, in its own way, as resonant and haunting as any song she had ever sung. And for those who had followed her from her early days in the Stone Ponies to her groundbreaking solo work, from the Broadway stage to her heartbreaking final performances, it felt like a final verse in a lifelong melody. A verse that didn't soar, but settled, grounded, honest, and human. There would be no encore, no grand return. But there didn't need to be. Because in admitting what everyone had long suspected, Linda Ronstadt had given the world something it didn't even realize it was missing: understanding. Her admission also underscored the distance between public perception and private experience. Fans had long viewed her as the epitome of confidence. A woman who knew exactly what she wanted and pursued it fearlessly. And in many ways that was true. But the vulnerability she revealed added texture to that portrait, making it all the more compelling. Confidence, it turns out, isn't the absence of struggle. It's the willingness to move forward despite it. And Ronstadt had done just that for decades, without ever asking for pity or praise. In speaking openly now, she allowed that facade of invincibility to soften, revealing the doubts, frustrations, and loneliness that accompanied her brilliance. It made her story richer, more human, and it gave her fans a deeper appreciation for the sheer willpower it had taken to maintain her standards, to follow her muse, to keep pushing against a system that often failed to understand her. It made her achievements all the more astonishing. There is something timeless about truth when it is finally spoken. It cuts through years of speculation, silences the noise, and leaves only what matters. Linda Ronstadt had always been known for her voice, but in this instance it was her courage, quiet, reflective, unapologetic, that left the deepest impression. And while she may never sing again, her final note, this revelation, echoed in a way that perhaps no song ever could, not because it was shocking, but because it was real, because it affirmed what many had suspected, but few had dared to articulate, that even legends grow tired, even icons need rest. And sometimes the bravest act isn't holding on, but letting go. If you liked this video, please give it a like and subscribe to our channel. Also, leave your comments below and tell us, what are your thoughts on Linda Ronstadt's admission? Surprised or expected it? We want to hear from you. Thank you for watching and see you next time.